So not too long ago, Esper the Bard did a video where he ranked different editions of D&D, and I kind of disagreed with him, so I want to take a crack at it. Today, on Greyhawk Grognard. Just a reminder, this is a collaboration video between myself, Tenkar's Tavern, and Joe the Lawyer. If you're watching their videos on my channel, please do like and subscribe to them. And if you're watching me on one of theirs, please do the same for me. And now, on with the show. So I'm going to be taking different editions of D&D, and I'm going to rank them using that usual ranking system, the S, A, B, C, D, F thing. I'm just going to go chronologically through the history of D&D. That means we're going to start with the white box, the little brown books. This was the first version of D&D that I bought. It was not, however, the first that I played because I, I was about 11 years old, 10 years old, and I was reading through this. I had played war games before, but I could not make heads or tails of this thing. So it was definitely not the easiest to learn just from reading the books. And, there's no getting around it. The artwork is kind of amateurish throughout, and it makes assumptions that you have chainmail, at least until you get the Greyhawk supplement, which includes a combat system that you can use on its own. It's not too well put together. There's no getting around that. So it is good from the perspective of history, but as a standalone game unto itself, it's wanting in a lot of areas. So unfortunately, the original Dungeons and Dragons is going to end up in the D tier. All right. So next up is the first version of D&D I actually played, and that is the Holmes basic version. This takes a lot of the stuff from the little brown books, the white box, and distilled. There goes my my D8, my original Holmes D8. Can't let this baby go away. So the rules here, they only go through level 3. They're very obviously minimalistic. There's only 48 pages of rules. It's a very, very playable game. Most of the rule book is taken up by spells, which is normal for rules. But the rules themselves, they only go up to page 14, and then the rest is spells and treasure. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of good stuff around how to play the game. It's very much of it's very straightforward, very well written, very well presented, and this is a great version to learn from. So I'm going to give it a much higher ranking than I did the white box. So Holmes Basic is going to end up in the B tier, a very respectable showing. So next up, we have Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This was the version I played the most, and this is the version I still play today in the form of Adventures Dark and Deep. But this is, to my mind, this is what really set Dungeons and Dragons on its trajectory towards enormous success. This was a codification and clarification of the rules from the basic D&D. It's split into 3 books: the Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and DM's Guide. And of course, there were later books as well. I'm just going to treat them all as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And this is it's clunky to read. It's not as easy to digest as Holmes Basic. There's no getting around that. But I think the rules are a lot more comprehensive. And aside from some glitchiness in the rules around melee and initiative and surprise and stuff like that, which are in the DM's Guide, and which most DMs kind of just house ruled around. Except for that, I think it plays really, really well. It is very easy to tinker with, which I, as a tinkerer, really like. The system doesn't fight you like some of the later systems do. Of course, it's not nearly as flexible in that regard as the white box, but it still has that feature that you can tinker around the edges and it doesn't break stuff elsewhere. So because of its and this is where we start to get the aesthetics really going. You get art like this. This is you get a lot of great tramp art. You get Dave Sutherland. There's it's not universally amazing art, but especially when you get into some of the adventure modules later on, you start getting into some of that wonderful full color art and stuff like the Temple of Elemental Evil. You can't, nobody can deny that is a great piece of art, and of course it's for first edition. So I'm not gonna lie, this has the biggest place in my heart for obvious reasons, but I'm gonna just rank it on its merits. So first edition AD&D is going into that coveted S slot. Um, I know it's going to sound like I'm biased, and I probably am, but there you go. Next up, we have Basic Dungeons and Dragons, published in 1981. This is what's referred to as BX. The first volume, the basic volume, was written by Tom Moldvay. The second expert box book was written by Zeb Cook. And this is very similar in rules to the Holmes Basic set. There are some important differences. Initiative is done as a group rather than individually, and there's monster morale and things like that. Magic missiles hit automatically, little things like that. But in terms of the rules themselves, they play very similar. There's not too much of a difference. If you were playing the one, you could play the other and not even blink an eye. It's more in the presentation. It is a little more polished. The artwork is much better. Obviously, the rules themselves, they've learned a lot over the intervening years in terms of presentation and so forth. So that does give it a little bit of an edge over Holmes. And so, because of that little edge, I'm going to have to put BX one slot above Holmes here in the A slot. And next up, we have Basic Dungeons and Dragons from 1983. This is written by Frank Mentzer and is referred to as the Beckme edition. That's because it goes from basic to expert to yada yada yada, all the way up to immortal. And as that implies, it is for a basic version. It is pretty complicated. They include all kinds of stuff like domain play, and you become gods, and there's just a lot packed in there. It's pretty huge, and although the basic rules are not too much removed from BX, they just Frank takes those rules and just runs with them. So in its way, it is a lot more complicated than even AD&D at the time. So that said, it's kind of a massive footprint on the history of D&D. But in terms of the gameplay, it's when you're at the normal levels, it plays pretty much the same as BX, but it does allow you to go way past that, and there are some obvious additions and changes when you get up that high. And so the Beckme, because it has that extra complexity, it knocks it down a peg for me, but it does have amazing art, which kind of makes up for it. So that's going to end up right there in the B tier next to Holmes Basic. And now we come to AD&D Second Edition, published in 1989. I played a ton of this when it came out. I completely embraced it. I loved that game. It is really a lot of fun to play. It takes the AD&D system and fixes the things that needed fixing, like initiative and so forth, and then it smooths out a lot of the rough edges, and it adds a ton of new stuff with those splat books for they got the blue ones for the DMs and the brown ones uh, for the players, and the green ones with the historicals, and it was massive. That was the era of the splat book. It was also the era of the setting, because there was an explosion of settings during the 2E era. That's when you had Dragonlance and Dark Sun and all these other things just came out of the woodwork, and that was just massive. And like I say, I played a ton of it. That said, it might be just a bit too much. Towards the end there, it was getting way too too many splat books. It was hard to keep track of what all was going on. And even at first, I thought it was a little too slick. I kind of like the rough edges of AD&D. That said, it also, just like AD&D, the first edition, it didn't fight you when you wanted to tinker. In fact, it encouraged it. That's why you got all the splat books. There's some pros and cons there, but it's still up there in my estimation. And so, second edition, where does it end up? It's got a lot of really amazing artwork too, which does put a lot of it in its favor. So that's going to hit that lovely, lovely A tier. Bit too slick, but a wonderful game to play. And then in 1991, we had the Rules Cyclopedia. This was essentially just a combination of all the stuff out of Beckme into a single book. They did do a lot of editing. They cleared up some rules, put in some errata, wordsmithed a bit, but the game itself is pretty much the same. So you can guess where the ranking's going to go. And no surprise, because it is a just a compilation, pretty much of Beckme. It's going right on that B tier, right next to it. And next up in 1995, we had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition Skills and Powers, and I'm splitting it out here because this addition, I should say, to 2E really detracted from it. It was completely out unbalanced. It's like nobody had play tested it; they just had to get it out there because they were desperate. And it felt like it, and it wrecked the game, honestly. And that's why I want to give it its own ranking, just because I need to make that that differentiation. And I know some people are going to say I should have done that with first edition and Unearthed Arcana, and I didn't. So second edition with skills and powers ends up in the C tier. It would go lower, except you could choose not to use these books. Which kind of defeats the whole purpose of having them. So anyway, it's in the C tier. And at long last, we come to Dungeons and Dragons Third Edition. This came out in 2000 and was the first version of the game published by Wizards of the Coast. This is a major departure from the versions that have gone before. All classes and races are mixable. You can have dwarven wizards and so forth. They add feats. They add all kinds of customizational things. So you can just turn characters into just about anything you want. And a lot of people, for a lot of people, that is a terrific thing. That's exactly what you want. I kind of like the idea that everybody can't be everything, that there are specializations and so forth. But hey, it's a very subjective thing. But there's no denying it was enormously successful. So as far as playing it, I did play the original 3.0 rules. They're okay. I personally didn't think they were anything special. The D20 system was such a radical departure from the system that had gone before. I kind of didn't cotton to it, and I immediately went back to first edition after having played third. But there you go. And so for 3.0, I know this is going to be controversial, but it's a subjective list. I don't like it myself, so I'm going to put it down here in the C tier, I'm afraid. And now we come to D&D 3.5, the version that came out in 2003. It's basically the previous version with a lot of tweaks based on player feedback that they'd received. In that sense, it can't be anything but an improvement. But if we take a look, I happen to have the Ruins of Castle Greyhawk, which was written for that very edition. I want to focus on the artwork. They have some really good art in this, because it's not just all about the rules themselves. It's about the aesthetics. They've got some really all throughout the books, not just this one. You've got some neat maps and everything. They did a really good job on the presentation. It's all very well laid out and everything. They got some very decent artwork throughout this. So I'm going to take all that into consideration with this particular ranking. But and obviously this is the one that when people think about third edition, this is the one they think about because this is the one most people played during that era. And for that reason alone, for the fact that it is and it's designed to be an improvement of the previous version, I'm going to knock it up a notch to the B tier. It's a decent enough game in and of itself, even though it's very different than what came before. And there's no getting around the fact that the aesthetics were really top notch. And we are entering the home stretch. Welcome to 2008, which saw the release of Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. What can I say that hasn't been said before about this train wreck? It was a radical departure from the previous version, which was itself a radical departure from the versions before. They took the game in a very tactical direction. It was very focused on combat. The artwork, this is when we see the artwork starting to turn into corporate sludge, and the even the setting material where they had that points of light thing, it was just bad. It was not a fun game. I never played it myself, but my group at the time, which was playing first edition, we got to see other people playing it at game stores. We would have a table, and the people around us would be playing fourth edition. So we got a dose of what it was like, and yeesh. So, that's my opinion is founded on observation rather than direct play, but there it is. And I know it has its proponents. Some people like it, but I think the vast majority agree with me and say it's just not good. So yeah, fourth edition, the one that tried to be Warcraft and failed, the one that made you use miniatures. Oh my God! So yeah, this is going in the basement. Sorry for its few but vociferous fans. And next up, we have fifth edition. Obviously, this is it's hard to separate the art from the artist, as they say. And this was the era that Wizards of the Coast pulled some really bad shenanigans as a company. But in terms of the game itself, it's a good game. It is this version is a fun game. It takes a lot of stuff from previous editions. It smooths over a lot of rough edges, which I don't normally like, but sometimes they need a little smoothing. It added the concept of advantage disadvantage, which was a terrific idea, and in and of itself gives this a place in gaming history, because a lot of other games have taken that and used it. It's not perfect. It's harder to kill characters in this one. They're on the road to being superheroes. We'll get there in a sec. And I'm not a big fan of the art in this. We're in corporate sludge territory here. It's just kind of there to I'm not a fan of the aesthetic personally of the game. But in terms of playing it, obviously I've played it, I've run it, I've written for it. It is a very decent game, and I think my ranking is going to surprise some of my longtime viewers. So here we go for fifth edition. Where is it going to land? Oh my goodness. Yes, it is on the A tier. I know. I surprised myself with this one, but it's a decent, flexible system. So and there's no denying its popularity. It doesn't hit the S tier for me because I just don't like the aesthetics of it. But from a gameplay point of view, it's really good. And now we come to present day. Welcome to D&D 5.5. Obviously, this is a sort of a redo of 5.0, and in my mind it took the game in a really bad direction. This is the characters became superheroes. It is almost impossible to kill them with all the death saves and everything. The monsters are underpowered. The aesthetic is, if anything, worse than what we saw in 5.0. I mean, I'm definitely not a fan of the aesthetic of this edition of the game. This is I don't agree with a lot of the design decisions that they took. Taking orcs out of being monsters and stuff like that. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but this was obviously intended for modern audiences, and I think that impacted it negatively. I think as a game, it's worse for that. So, 5.5, that's what we have right now. And rumors are there's another one coming. And so here we come to the final ranking of our video. Where is this going to land? 5.5. Oh my God. Yeah, it's in the D tier. Nothing's really going to save this thing, which is a shame because 5.0 was very decent, and the changes that they made for 5.5 just really, really wrecked it. And there you have it. I'm sure not everybody is going to agree with my rankings, and that's the nature of these things. It's a subjective measure. So I would love to hear what your thoughts on some of these are. Where do you agree with me? Where do you disagree with me? Please sound off in the comments. That's what makes this all fun, is when we can engage with each other. So hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will talk to you all later. Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day. And next up in 1995, we had advanced on that. And next up in 1980, 19. And next up in 1995, we had Adventures. And next up in 1995, we had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition Players Options. No, God damn. Okay, stop. This is a